Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone joining us today in person and online. My name is Neha. I work with the Hands of Mother Earth Alliance. This press conference is organized by the Global Forest Coalition, which is a member of the Hands of Mother Earth Alliance. Before I start, I want to declare I have no conflict of interest and no ties to the fossil fuel industry. We are here at the UN climate negotiations in Bonn, where critical decisions are being made on climate crisis. Yet alongside these discussions, we are seeing an expansion of false solutions like blue economy initiatives, which are being advanced under the guise of climate action. These initiatives are impacting communities of the global majority world. They are deepening extractivism, enabling a destructive development model, driving displacement, and undermining livelihoods. We are deeply concerned about also the risky geoengineering, marine geoengineering outdoor experiments that are taking place, and research that is being aimed at commercial interests. These schemes aim to manipulate the oceans, do not address the root causes of the climate crisis, and temporarily mask the effects of climate change. Concerningly, we are seeing both being discussed in policy spaces at the UN as a climate solution. Our panelists here will share their concerns, also highlight existing restrictive international governance that already exists, and precautionary principles. With that, I hand over to our first speaker, Ranjana Giri from APWLT.
Thank you, Neha. As we know, oceans sustain the livelihoods, food sovereignty, and cultures of small-scale fishers, coastal and island communities, and indigenous peoples. Unfortunately, the blue economy framework, the oceans are increasingly being positioned as the next frontier for unchecked extraction, corporate monopolization, and geopolitical conflict. For the oceans are commodified as the blue economy model expects ocean to contribute 1.5 trillion US dollars annually to the global GDP, while it is projected to reach 3 trillion USD by 2030. To generate this money out of our oceans, some more false solutions like conservation schemes, coastal maladaptation infrastructure projects, and more activities to come to be supported by blue carbon markets, blue bonds, etc., are being advanced to add to the list of schemes to avoid a real reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And we know these rely on plundering of the global south resources while reproducing it. We can take some examples. The World Bank's Pro-Blue project, Thailand Resilient Transport Connectivity, and Irrawaddy Dolphin Conservation Project, which is framed within the blue economy and resilient connectivity narratives, which includes 7 kilometers lake bridge connecting Songkhla and Patalang province, which they are also planning to do the conservation activities in the Irrawaddy dolphin conservation. And the project is expected to impact at least 20 communities surrounding that Songkhla lake, as due to this lake breeze, fish stocks are declining and traditional livelihoods are threatened as fisheries are forced to change their occupation and seek work in other informal sectors, which is making them more vulnerable to the precarious works. And another example, again, is the expansion of the industrial shrimp aquaculture for export-oriented business in Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, which also damages the fishing grounds that families have relied on for several generations, and while being promoted under this blue growth again, and it is branded as food security or climate resilient livelihood narratives. Another example, in Indonesia, Karimun Jawa Islands are open for ecotourism, which is owned by foreign investors, often under sustainable tourism and blue growth narrative. In some cases, up to 90% of the islands are privately owned. And governments assert its power through military to protect these businesses, which destroy the ecosystems, undermine the small-scale subsistence economies while violating the human rights and women-led initiatives. Such impacts weaken community resilience and shift the cost of climate-level development onto those who are already facing the climate risk. And more examples are port expansions, land reclamation, special economic zones, which are transforming coastlines and erasing the livelihoods built on them. And we see this in Colombo port city in Sri Lanka, in Kottupalli port in India, Gwadar port in Balochistan, while Thailand's eastern and southern economic corridors as well. And further, oceans are becoming experimentation site for deep sea mining, marine geoengineering, marine carbon dioxide removal, and other high-risk potential disastrous technologies, and as well as military exercises and nuclear testing, which threatens the marine ecosystems, food sovereignty, and uses ocean as mere dumping site for critical minerals for electric vehicles and nuclear power plant waste. And despite so many evidences on the impacts of blue economy on communities and women, in the Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue, which happened yesterday and day before, it was disheartening to see that the critical issues regarding women, and particularly small-scale fisheries, IPs, and their free prior conformed consent and right to clean, healthy environment, right to self-determination were not the main agenda there. And no one held the parties accountable for the ongoing and accelerating plundering and destruction, dying of the oceans, and delaying of the transformative action. And instead, more blue economy, more blue carbon, and conservation schemes and carbon markets got the hype, And since international financial institutions, corporations, and conservation actors are the key drivers for shaping this blue economy, isn't at the cost of communities in the global south, we strongly demand holding them accountable while also strengthening the local grassroots movement and resistances. We demand rejection of these blue economy models that accelerate ocean graving, ocean degradation, and false climate solutions. And we demand advancement of just and equitable transition that prioritizes people's needs, food sovereignty, and sustainable livelihoods rather than profit. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjana. I hand over to Kwame.
Thank you, Neha. My name is Kwame Bonjo. I'm speaking on behalf of the Global Forest Coalition and Home Alliance African Working Group. Another color of colonialism, namely blue economy, is expanding and taking control of our ocean and of the people living and depending on the ocean. In addition to industrial fisheries, marine energy, and coastal infrastructures, which are already having a huge impact on coastal communities, blue economy also considers the ecosystem services provided by water bodies, including carbon sequestration. The expansion and intensification of these blue carbon sequestration projects could easily lead to geoengineering technologies, such as ocean alkalinity enhancement, ocean fertilization, and ocean seaweed cultivation for biomass sinking. In 2022, the collaboration between the Center of Climate Repair and Cambridge, CCRC, and the University of Cape Town was disclosed. And under the direction of the Center of Climate Repair and at Cambridge, the University of Cape Town planned in 2023 to conduct ocean fertilization experiments with buoyant flakes in the Southern Ocean. According to the Center of Climate Repair and at Cambridge, large-scale ocean fertilization experiments will be conducted between 2023 and 2026. The results from these preliminary experiments will inform large-scale field trials in the period of 2023 and 2026 under the lead of CCRC, targeting all major ocean deep water basins to inform potential global deployment starting in 2027. The fisher folk's home is at risk due to the expansion of carbon removal projects under blue economy schemes. At a climatically relevant scale, each marine geoengineering technology could utilize 10 to 20% of the ocean surface and operates continuously for centuries, bringing a range of impacts, including disrupting rainfall patterns, damaging delicate ecosystems, and undermining fisheries. Marine geoengineering brings risks to the livelihoods of indigenous peoples, local and traditional communities, and fisherfolks who rely on marine and coastal ecosystems. The Human Rights Council report on the issue has found that climate-altering technologies, including submarine geoengineering techniques, could seriously interfere with the enjoyment of human rights for millions or perhaps billions of people. And that potential deployment of geoengineering technologies will have a massive and disproportionate impact on indigenous peoples, including fisherfolks, whose traditional lands and territories and territories are particularly exposed and at risk of experimental uses. Fisherfolks and coastal communities are already being impacted by the temperature rising, flooding, and coastal erosion. The West African coast is already being taken by coastal erosion. The deployment of the dangerous and destructive technologies will only worsen the climate crisis and the impacts on peoples and communities. The upcoming Our Ocean Conference, the first to be held in Africa, has in its center of focus blue economy. It will highlight the connection between people and the ocean. We want effective and real connection. We don't want our ocean to be sold. And for centuries, fisherfolks and coastal communities know how to communicate with ocean and preserve their livelihoods. We will not accept any risky technologies to be developed in our ocean. We call on government to prevent outdoors marine geoengineering experiments from taking place. To protect ocean, marine ecosystems, communities, fisherfolks, and indigenous peoples that depend on them, including by upholding the precautionary principles, the right to free, prior, and informed consent, and the right of access to information, public participation in decision-making, and access to justice. To urge, prioritize real solutions to the climate crisis by equitable phasing out fossil fuels and then greenhouse gases emissions reduction, and supporting the many decentralized, diverse, and readily available alternatives for socially and ecologically sustainable production and consumption patterns, including provision of climate finance by wealthy countries in accordance with their fair share and equity. Our home, land, ocean, and sky are not a laboratory for risky and manipulative planetary scale technologies. Stop geoengineering Africa and the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Kwame. I hand over to Akaluk.
Unanotak, Kayana Kaiplusi Mawa Wanga Akaluk, Ungalak Thirmirunga. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Akaluk Adrian Blatchford. I am from a small coastal village on the northwest coast of Alaska, right in the heart of the Norton Sound on the Bering Sea Unalakleet. I work with Indigenous in educational network of Turtle Island and a member of HOME. I do not have ties or interests in the fossil fuel industry. I come today carrying my ancestors with the weight of the village that depends on me. As the Arctic continues to warm 4 times faster than the rest of the world, we see the wealthy global North countries and the 1% move towards a global technology regime, presenting these false climate solutions funded by big polluters under the guise of climate mitigation through the use of technology. The invasion of AI data centers on indigenous and public lands and waters in critical ecosystems, and the expansion of fossil fuel and so-called critical mineral extractions. These plans are only to allow business as usual while commodifying Mother Earth and Father Sky, who protects our home. Our very existence as caretakers of this one and only Earth is threatened by the Blue Carbon Initiative and the blue and green economies that are pushing these agendas. It is time for the world to move away from the harmful extractive industries, from these false solutions, the big polluters, move away from the big polluters and towards the indigenous-led just transition by creating regenerative local economies and healthy food systems. Indigenous peoples are at the forefront of this movement. We will advance the world into restorative practices that have allowed us to thrive in our homeland since time immemorial, with our cosmovisions, our spiritual practices, and collective inherent connection to the land and what it provides. Unlike Western science that has constantly to be tested and proved theories, our traditional knowledge holds truth and a millennia of lived experience where our inherent collective cultural teachings have proven effective. I challenge decision makers to think introspectively beyond technicality in this moment we are in. How are you preparing future generations for an opportunity to experience healthy lives? Our lands and waters in the far north struggle to breathe. The carbon sink that holds the persistent organic pollutants and microplastics, the mercury leaching into our waters and increased methane emissions as a result of the melting permafrost, coastal erosion, and heightened coastal water levels, the mass sinkholes and drunken forests will only spread south as these climate disasters are induced by dysregulation of emissions and industrialization and the introduction of false solutions with the use of technology. Geoengineering, also known as climate mitigation with the use of technology, is not the answer. We do not need blue or green economies. We need a healthy and thriving home for all that is not dependent on capitalism, imperialism, Zionism, patriarchy, and white supremacy. We must act as a collective and do the right thing. We demand climate justice. We demand clean water and air. We demand access to direct funding and the elimination of third-party distribution. We demand the halt of exploration and extraction of fossil fuel and so-called critical minerals. We demand to have a seat at the table to partake in these negotiations for free, prior, informed consent and meaningful government-to-government consultation to be met. We reject false solutions, stop geoengineering and AI data centers, free Palestine, free Daria and the 17, stop the bombing for profit, stop the war, stop the ecocide, stop the genocide. The time is now. And in the words of Annie Alawa, I will fight until I melt. Koyana Davra.
Thank you, Akaluk, for that powerful intervention. I hand over to Mary.
Thank you. My name is Mary Church. I'm from the Centre for International Environmental Law, and I affirm that I do not have ties to the fossil fuel industry. So marine geoengineering, and just to be clear what we're talking about when we talk about marine geoengineering, that term encompasses both solar radiation modification or solar geoengineering techniques that take place from the marine environment, and it includes marine carbon dioxide removals, right? In the course of my comments, I'm focusing mostly on the CDR aspects of marine geoengineering, but it does include both of those categories of approaches. So marine geoengineering proposes intervention at a really unprecedented scale in delicate ocean ecosystems, which are already severely stressed by overexploitation, pollution, and warming from climate change, with potentially grave consequences for communities, ocean biodiversity, food webs, fisheries, and even the ocean's natural capacity to sequester carbon. The false promise of marine geoengineering is a dangerous distraction that risks delaying real, proven solutions to the climate crisis. Far from addressing the climate crisis, these technologies could in fact exacerbate it. And really central to understanding the risks that my colleagues have gone into more detail on, the risks to communities, the risks to ecosystems and biodiversity, the people who depend upon them, is really this question of scale, both physical and temporal scale, that these interventions would need to be deployed at to have a climate meaningful impact. So for 1 gigaton removal, if that even could be done by these techniques, for 1 gigaton of carbon dioxide removals from ocean fertilization and ocean alkalinity enhancement, we're talking about utilizing somewhere between 10 and 20% of the ocean surface, right? That's enormous. The ocean covers 70% of the world's surface, 10 to 20% of the ocean surface for 1 gigaton removal. And then you have to do it year after year after year after year, right? It's not a one-off thing. Direct ocean capture would require processing 9,000 kilometers squared of water through the plants per gigaton removal, and that's at a conservative estimate. And again, we're talking about year after year after year after year. And that processing harms, delicate marine life and basically returns effectively dead water back to the ocean. For the seaweed cultivation for biomass sinking could require an equivalent to a 100-meter belt around the world's coastline for only 0.1 gigaton of carbon dioxide removal. So you see why the scale is absolutely key to the to feasibility, right? Is it even feasible to conceive of deploying these industries at such a scale? And then, if it were possible to deploy at such a scale, the immense harm that they would do for communities and ecosystems. So obviously, marine geoengineering at climate-relevant scales is inherently transboundary. Impacts would not be confined to deployment sites, and the physical, ecological, and social consequences would extend across borders and regions. Marine CDR technologies have not been proven effective in the long-term removal and storage of CO2. There are no reliable means to monitor, report, or verify the carbon dioxide that could theoretically be sequestered, and the challenges to ever doing robust MRV are really kind of immense. So even just the question of establishing baselines across the vastness and complexity and diversity of the ocean, just to start with, that's an epic challenge. We are therefore really concerned about the growth in outdoor marine geoengineering experiments, marine CDR experiments, many of which are already pre-selling carbon credits, clearly driven by the voluntary carbon markets and risking being legitimized by the Paris Agreement, Article 6.4 mechanism, and the at times ambiguous focus on blue carbon frames and ocean mitigation in this process. And indeed, the UN World Ocean Assessment report that was published this week emphasizes that the integration of marine carbon dioxide removals into carbon markets is integral to its success. So this process must not legitimize activities that are already subject to precautionary decisions under other conventions. And not only is marine geoengineering subject to the long-standing and repeatedly reaffirmed de facto moratorium on geoengineering at the Convention on Biological Diversity, but it is also regulated under the London Convention and London Protocol, which prohibits ocean fertilization deployment and is looking at regulating a further 4 techniques. And both of these regimes, importantly, exclude specific, so they both have sort of caveats for certain research studies, and the London Convention, London Protocol has a legitimate scientific research framework, but both of these regimes effectively exclude carbon credits, projects that sell carbon credits from going ahead. And then we also have the recent advisory opinions from ITLOS and the ICJ that make very clear that states have obligations under international law not only to protect the oceans from the drivers and impacts of climate change, but they underscore that states must interpret their obligations under international law harmoniously, and that they must adopt a precautionary approach. And specifically with regard to risky and speculative unproven technologies like marine CDR, ITLOS cautions that marine geoengineering would be contrary to UNCLOS if it had the consequence of introducing pollutants to the marine environment or transforming one form of pollution into another. So parties in this regime and others must uphold this precautionary governance framework. They must prioritise proven approaches that reduce the risk of harm by addressing the root causes of the climate crisis, and central to this is a rapid, just and equitable phase out of fossil fuel production and use. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I now open the floor for any questions.
I'm Vincent. I'm a child from Ocean, and my expertise, my doctorate is on sustainable fishing. So I join you all in making certain demands. One, marine-based geoengineering should be banned completely. Without doing EAA, renewable energy from the ocean should be banned. In the name of just a transition, the subsidy that is given to the artisanal fishers for the use in their inboard and outboard engine shouldn't be cancelled. Fishers have to have the participation in the management and the use of the sea at least up to contiguous zone, if possible up to exclusive economic zone. And I make just one question to you. Are there accurate systems to measure blue carbon for the development of blue carbon markets? They speak about blue carbon markets. Do they have accurate system to measure this? Thank you.
No. Big fat no. And that was a simple answer. Thank you, though, for that question. I think the world needs to hear that there are no, with the use of technology, there are no real climate solutions. Without Indigenous peoples, fisher folks, waste pickers, union workers, we need the world to work together for these real solutions to move forward. And by doing that, we need to tap into these knowledge systems that have carried the world for a millennia with leaving little to no carbon footprint. We've survived without it, so no. I saw another hand out there.
Thank you. My name is Bart Verheggen. I'm from the Dutch Meteorological Institute and part of the Dutch delegation here. Regarding the use of terminology, Mary Church, you clarified indeed the term geoengineering to refer to both carbon dioxide removal, CDR, and solar radiation modification, SRM. I would actually encourage to not use the term geoengineering to refer to both these classes of approaches, given that they're so different in how they intend to tackle or not quite tackle climate change, if you wish, and a very, very different risk profile. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has already in their latest report 5 years ago moved away for these reasons in using the term geoengineering to refer to these very, very different classes of approaches. So I would caution against using the term geoengineering to refer to things ranging from planting trees to spraying sulfur in the stratosphere. I mean, there's such wildly different approaches that one term to encompass all is, I think, not fruitful for the debate. It's too confusing, so to speak. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify, the definition of geoengineering comes under the Convention on Biological Diversity as well as the IPCC, and it refers to large-scale planetary or large-scale interventions in Earth systems, right? That's what connects all of these different categories of approaches. And there has been a sort of a splitting out of what is sometimes referred to as solar radiation modification or even management, which starts to sanitize the idea of these approaches, and carbon dioxide removals. And, you know, that's, that tends to normalize and legitimize what are still albeit different, and absolutely agree with you, different risks from different approaches, but they're extreme, and what they all have in common is the scale at which they would need to be deployed to have a meaningful climate impact. And that's why we stick to the word geoengineering to cover all of these things, to really emphasize the fact of scale and therefore the harms that can come from the implementation or the deployment of these techniques.
Thank you. We are out of time. Our panelists are available outside to speak to the media. Thank you.